We're counting down to the Cricket World Cup in India. It's just 5 months away. Last time India hosted it, we won the whole thing. So this time, expectations are huge, but so are controversies. Pakistan, for one, is threatening to boycott the tournament. First, listen in to their cricket board chief.
I'm not worried about the Asia Cup. It's the World Cup, and India should not be looking at a situation where we end up boycotting the Asia Cup and also the World Cup, and then India ends up boycotting the Champions Trophy. There'll be a huge mess.
Why is Pakistan threatening a boycott? Because India has refused to play in Pakistan. There's another major tournament scheduled before the World Cup. That's the Asia Cup. It's slated for September and Pakistan is hosting. But the BCCI says India will not go. No prizes for guessing why. Pakistan's security situation is still bad. More than 430 terror attacks were reported until April. Total casualties, more than 850 people dead and injured. So naturally, the BCCI is wary. You see, the men in blue are not just a cricket team for us. They represent a lot more. They're India's global ambassadors. So sending them to Pakistan is a huge risk. When India objected, Pakistan came back with a plan. What if Team India's matches were played elsewhere, perhaps in the UAE? The other teams could still play in Pakistan. Well, no luck so far. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and India have rejected this plan, and each for their own reason. Which brings us to the World Cup in October. Pakistan wants to play tit for tat. They say, if you can't play in Pakistan, we won't play in India. And what is the BCCI saying? No official statement so far, but from the looks of it, they won't budge. Not unless the ICC decides to intervene. That's the International Cricket Council, ICC. Now, what do we make of this Pakistani threat? Are they serious or are they bluffing? Just look at what's happening in their country. Until last week, the BCCI had just one worry, and that was terror attacks. But now there's a full-blown constitutional crisis in Pakistan. You have protests, you have crackdowns, and you have tanks rolling on the streets. Pakistan cannot handle one ex-cricketer. Can they really handle dozens from India? Seems unlikely. The fact is, Pakistan's security situation is not acceptable. Certainly not for Team India to visit. So what's the solution? Maybe the ICC can broker some deal, perhaps convince India to play its matches outside Pakistan or simply pull the entire tournament from the country. And that's the big worry for Pakistan, really. If they lose hosting rights, they also lose a lot of money. How much money are we talking about? Around $3 million. So Pakistan needs the Asia Cup. They need the revenue more than the actual trophy. It's unfortunate for Pakistani fans, but they should know who to blame. Their own politicians and generals. Time for a short detour. Do you know why Pakistan doesn't host major tournaments anymore? Because of what happened in 2009. The Sri Lankan team was attacked by terrorists. 6 of them were wounded in the attack. It was after 2009 that cricket left Pakistan, and now we are told things are different. That Pakistan is safe again. I can tell you what the stock arguments are. Sri Lanka toured Pakistan in 2019, England toured in 2022, Australia also toured in the same year. But here's a question. Does Pakistan sponsor terror attacks in Australia? Does it claim sovereign English territory? Does it send terrorists to attack Sri Lankan cities? I don't think so. They're capable of it, but they haven't really done it yet. But India has suffered all of it. So the Australian team may feel safe in Pakistan, but an Indian team will not, especially the most powerful and popular team in Indian sport. That's one part of the argument. The second is linking politics and sports. A lot of people will say, don't do it. Don't link politics and sports. But how many of them have a neighbor who uses terror as state policy? I guess none. The last India-Pakistan bilateral was played in 2012-2013. Pakistan came to India back then. The year before that, in 2011, India hosted the World Cup. Team India played Pakistan in the semi-finals. Former Prime Minister of India, Manmohan Singh, invited the Pakistani Prime Minister to watch the match. You may remember these pictures. It was called cricket diplomacy. Let's go even further back. To 2003-2004, the Indian team travelled to Pakistan. This was just 4 years after Kargil. It was called a big diplomatic gesture. But what did India get in return on all these occasions? Betrayals and more terror attacks. You see, the idea of linking politics and sports is not some outdated and narrow ideology. It's happened throughout history. And India has a valid reason to do so. Why make money for the Pakistani Cricket Board? Why give lucrative IPL contracts to Pakistani players? And don't get me wrong, this is not about punishing the Pakistani public or their players. This is about putting a squeeze on the top bosses. It's much like how sanctions work. So Pakistan would do well to get its own house in order first. Perhaps figure out how to deal with their raging captain before hosting neighbors. Qatar could soon have a top job at the United Nations. It's been nominated to lead the ILO, that's the International Labour Organization. Think of it as the labour police. They protect the rights of workers, they suggest reforms, and they also prepare reports on various countries. Next month, the ILO will hold its annual conference. A new chair will have to be nominated there. Reports say it will be this man, Saeed bin Samik al-Mari, the Labour Minister of Qatar. And his name is controversial, I'll tell you why. Imagine you have a UN body on rebuilding Ukraine after the war. Would you nominate Russia to lead it? Of course not. Now imagine there is a United Nations body for Uyghur protection. Would you nominate China to head it? I'm assuming not. Now this move by the ILO is no different because Qatar's treatment of labourers is notorious. Think back to last year's FIFA World Cup. Do you remember all the controversy around it? Reports said 6,500 migrant workers died at construction sites. They died building stadiums, roads and hotels, but Qatar has not even acknowledged it. Even before the World Cup, their record was poor. No right to strike, no right to organize, no right to demand higher wages. They also had something called the kafala system. It's basically a sponsorship. A company would pay and house migrant workers. In return, they would have complete control over those workers. Their passports could be taken away. Even changing jobs required the employer's permission. This was almost like forced labor. On paper, Qatar has abolished the system, but reports say it is still prevalent. And yet, Qatar has been nominated to lead the ILO. What explains this double game? In one word, money. I'll recount two cases for you. The first is from 2017. Qatar gave $25 million to the ILO's Doha office. What for? To run a labour reforms program. Now, countries donating to the ILO is not new or unusual, but $25 million? That's not a donation, that's a bribe. Speaking of which, Qatar is directly bribing government officials as well. Look at this headline. Member of European Parliament denies Qatar bribery after €1.5 million seized. In November, this politician defended Qatar's labour record. 1 month later, she was arrested. So this has been Qatar's policy, use petrodollars to bribe and lobby abroad. That's how they got the 2022 World Cup. That's how they could lead the ILO too. In December last year, the organization's chief visited Doha. He was all praises. He said there was progress on health, safety and working hours. Now let's be clear here. Qatar's labour laws were at rock bottom. There was only one direction to go, and that was up. But should the ILO be cheering and endorsing that? Well, they did. And it set the wrong precedent. In June, Qatar's lobbying will be tested in Geneva. That's where the ILO will meet. The organization may have nominated Qatar, but the members must approve it. If they do, it will be an institutional failure for the United Nations, and it won't be the first. In 2020, China was appointed to the UN Human Rights Council. Their qualification? Jailing 1 million Uyghurs. In 2022, North Korea led the United Nations top disarmament group. What was their qualification? Lobbing missiles, I guess. What do these examples tell you? There's something inherently broken in the United Nations system. If you have money, you can circumvent it. Like how China did with the Human Rights Council or Qatar with the ILO. But such appointments will have long-term consequences. A, they will erode trust in the UN or whatever is left of it, make it a laughing stock. And B, it will set back socio-economic progress. There is still time for the ILO to change course. Let's see what happens at their June summit. To Germany now, Berlin is quite annoyed with Beijing. Why? Because of China's secret police stations. They're still operational, though China says they're not. It said it shut down such facilities in February. Also, China doesn't call them secret police stations, it calls them service stations. Either way, it assured Germany that such stations had been closed. So Germany decided to check, and it found that China was lying. The Interior Ministry spokesperson has issued a statement. Let me quote from what has been said. The security authorities continue to assume that there are 2 so-called overseas police stations in Germany. How do you think China responded to this? With another denial. The Chinese embassy in Berlin has issued a statement. You can see the translation on your screen. Let me give you the highlights of this. These volunteers are simply dedicated overseas Chinese, not Chinese police officers. There are also no so-called police stations or overseas police service centers. These voluntary offers of support have been discontinued. We can expect that the German side will deal with this objectively and leave no room for further speculation. There were also the usual declarations of China respecting international law and sovereignty. Now, China would have you believe that all of this is harmless, that these stations have no sinister agenda. They're just outposts to help Chinese citizens abroad, but no one's taking their word for it. The world sees these stations for what they really are, centers to intimidate Chinese dissidents. They're set up in areas with a sizable Chinese diaspora, and they act like Beijing's dirty work departments. They perform tasks that are too shady for diplomats, like tracking down dissidents, intimidating them to go back to China. And there are many such people all over the world. Those who opposed the communist regime and had to flee China. Those who had politically motivated cases against them. Those who face arrest on trumped-up charges in China. Such people try to make a life for themselves in other countries. Many of them leave their families behind in China, and that becomes their weakness that Beijing exploits. They force dissidents to return, and they threaten harm to their families. And it's all done through these secret police stations. China runs them all over the world, hundreds of them. The first reports about these came out last year. Many countries woke up to this fact. They decided to take action. Last October, a German spokesperson made a bold declaration. I'm quoting again. The federal government does not tolerate the exercise of foreign state authority, and accordingly, Chinese authorities have no executive powers on the territory of the Federal Republic of Germany. It's been more than 6 months since, but China's secret police stations are still around. How? They've apparently gone mobile. Yesterday, a spokesperson said that the stations are, quote-unquote, usually not fixed stationary offices, but mobile facilities. So basically, Chinese intimidators on wheels. How lovely. This adaptability is why countries are struggling to shut these stations down. When under the scanner, the secret Chinese police stations just up and move. And according to the US, they also purge their data. Last month, we told you about 2 arrests. 2 Chinese secret police officials were arrested in the US. On what charges? Obstructing justice by destroying evidence of their communications. Basically, erasing the data. You see how it can be difficult to dismantle the insidious Chinese operation. Yesterday, Germany publicly rebuked China, and as usual, China denied any wrongdoing. Until countries find a way to tighten the screws, Beijing will keep on meddling in their territory. You've heard of life coaches, I'm sure, or career coaches. But do you know about smile coaches? They're specialist smile tutors, and they've become all the rage in Japan, especially in the post-Wuhan virus era. 2 months back, Japan lifted its mask mandate. You don't have to wear a mask in public anymore, which should be good news, except that the Japanese have forgotten how to express it with a smile. After spending almost 3 years behind masks, their facial muscles have become a bit rusty, it seems. People say they've forgotten how to smile. So now they're paying tutors to teach them how to smile. I'm not making this up. The next time someone says you can't put a price on a smile, tell them about this. Because Japan's smile coaches charge up to $650. Here's a report.
It takes 43 muscles to frown and only 17 muscles to smile. But that's easier said than done. Introverts will probably relate to this. But what's happening now is not limited to them. We're talking about the Japanese. They've been concealing their mouths for 3 years now, covering their faces with masks, all thanks to the Wuhan virus. But this March, their government relaxed the mask rules, so the Japanese people became free to roam around without masks. But this didn't really relax them. In fact, it had the very opposite reaction. Because with the mask off, their emotions lay bare, so they are now trying to put smiles on their faces. Except instead of beaming grins, they are breaking into awkward smiles. some of which are completely fake, and others simply look pained. We're not kidding. The Japanese are really struggling with their smiles. They're failing to adapt to a life without face masks. Some say they have completely forgotten how to smile. Others say they try to smile, but their facial muscles are rusty. Some have even developed a complex about it. They feel awkward about their smile. So they're looking for solutions. They want to relearn the art of smiling. And believe it or not, there are people who specialize in helping them. We're talking about smile coaches. Japan has hundreds of them. They're specialist smile tutors who are teaching people how to smile. They have become pioneers of an odd business that is surprising the world: smile education. These tutors want people to devote time to smiling, to do it consciously and do it more often. They now have thousands of students who pay about $650 each to regain their smile. For them, this course is totally worth it, and that sounds believable. Smiling is good for both physical and mental well-being. It helps people live longer by relieving stress, boosting immune systems, and reducing blood pressure. Plus, social contact is the key to good living, and facial expressions are the key to social contact. The Japanese know this. They've even inculcated a culture of laughter yoga, much like in India. But due to social distancing, they seem to have forgotten the basics. So the Japanese are participating in smiling studies. They're learning how to relax their facial muscles and training them just as they train their body muscles. They're holding up mirrors to check their progress, and a lot of them are coming out of these classes happy customers. And why wouldn't they? After all, they spend hours smiling. These classes are a hit among Japanese women, but these classes aren't just for retail customers. Companies like IBM are holding smile training sessions for their employees too. And nursing homes are hiring smile tutors for their elderly residents. We know this sounds odd, hiring a tutor and paying to relearn something as basic as smiling, but maybe there is an upside to this. Maybe we can all learn a bit from the Japanese. Along with leg and arm days during our workouts, maybe we can also incorporate smile days.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Sudan. A fire broke out in the city of Omdurman. This is where intense battles have been fought between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary troops. In Italy's Pompeii, 2 more victims of a 2,000-year-old volcanic eruption have been found. In Peru, an anemic, malnourished and hypothermic sloth has been rescued. And finally, taking you back in history, what makes the 16th of May significant? On this day, the so-called Cultural Revolution was launched in China by communist leader Mao Zedong. The year was 1966. Mao wanted to assert, his authority over the Chinese government and the people. He felt that China was headed in the wrong direction. He wanted the so-called impure elements of the society to be purged. In the months and years that followed, elderly and intellectual people were attacked and harassed. Millions of people, were killed. Many were tortured and imprisoned. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Lui aveva la protezione, quella cosa tonda.
email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.